Victorian Britain is remembered as an era of stark inequalities. The Industrial Revolution had led to vast wealth for country and empire, but wealth that was built on the back of hardship and suffering. Colonialism created exploitable subjects worldwide, and at home industrial workers toiled long hours in harsh conditions for very little pay. Amongst increasing deprivation and unemployment, poor laws were passed that led to the creation of workhouses. Institutions designed to shame and humiliate those unable to work, while cutting costs to the taxpayer to an absolute minimum. The Eastville Workhouse in Bristol was opened at 100 Fishponds Road in 1847, and the name alone still strikes fear upon the older generations. My great nan was born in the workhouse in 1918, and recent discoveries show just how unlikely it would be to make it out of the institution. Thousands of paupers lived, died, and were even buried at 100 Fishponds Road, while the riches of the British Empire continued to grow.
It all starts from people in Bristol Radical History Group, some of whom live in Eastville, including myself. We were getting drunk one night, and unlike what we probably should have been was like, I don't know, out at old people's clubs, but we stayed and got drunk and looked at old maps. We found this old burial ground marked on it, and it was close to the site of the Eastville Workhouse, and it's literally around the corner from where we live. It's like it's on this estate called East Park now, and we looked at it and thought, so that was disused in 1905, and then we thought, well, maybe it was there already before the workhouse was there. So we did a bit of research and discovered that actually it was the burial ground for Eastville Workhouse. Now, Eastville Workhouse, we discovered, was a massive institution. You see it here. It's a huge institution built in 1847, and to give you an idea about how big it was, there's a picture there. So this is Fishponds Road up here. This is Robertson Road. But you can see it's a huge institution. I mean, I looked at that and thought that looks like a labour camp to me, which is kind of what it was really, because it has a sort of look of a sort of factory complex or something, doesn't it? Anyway, so we did a bit of research. This is 2010 actually, and realised that this was a burial ground. We started to look a little bit into the records and thought there's thousands of people buried here, down in this area down here. And we thought, I wonder if there was no marker on the site or anything. And we went down to Rosemary Green, as it's called now. You look at it, and there's absolutely no sign that first of all, you wouldn't know there'd been a workhouse there really, unless you knew, even though it's a huge institution. And secondly, you would have no idea there was a burial ground there. And then we sort of did, over the next few years, on and off, we did some research. It really took off in 2012. Then we held a public meeting in Eastville. About 50 people turned up, which was great. And then we formed Eastville Workhouse Memorial Group, which is a community group to try and memorialise the site, to say, right, we're not going to let these people be forgotten. So the primary aim is not to write books, do research or anything really. The primary aim is to get a memorial there and to get all the names of all the people, which we've done now. There are 4,084 men, women and children who were buried in Rosemary Green, and there are another 118 people who were given for dissection. I say given, they were sold for dissection.
When you go for the records, there's no mention of a grave number. That gives you a clue as well, that you know that they weren't buried in a grave.
And these dear little, often you get a mum and then 3 of her children within a week all die.
Yeah.
There must have been typhoid or something going through at the time. You just can't imagine how heartbreaking it must have been to get there all, in rags really, and hungry and nothing, and then they take the little you have away from you and separate the children. In a small classroom where children have the slates, on one side it's frosted, and so they know their dads are on the other side, but they don't see them. And then on this side it's glass, and they can see their mothers, but they can't go out. How cruel. I mean, it makes me want to cry thinking about it.
It does.
I just think, I've got 4 boys, and if I was there, it would just kill you. My children went to May Park School, as yours did, didn't they? Which is the actual site of where the workhouse was originally. And we were planting some trees at the back the children were going to grow at the same time as the trees. And then in those days, and that must have been the mid-80s, there was the vicar from St Anne's said, we don't want to go down too far, that it's hallowed ground, I think they called it, or
Yes.
protected ground, because that's where people were buried.
The whole area was it was a bad place to do it, but they did it because it saved them a huge amount of money. They didn't have to take the bodies anywhere, they didn't need coffins, they just wrapped them in cloth and then they buried, and in this area, from the top of that hill where those fences, down to the bottom of the hill where those goalposts are, and all the way up to about close to here, they banged 4,000 people in there in multiple graves over about 50 years. Before the poor laws, if you were a pauper, you would have been buried in an unmarked grave, or maybe with a little wooden cross in a church graveyard. But because this new poor law system, they're trying to cut costs, and they're trying to also make pauper burials disgraceful. They did have a priest, he might do multiple ones at the same time, save money from the workhouse. He'd come down and go bloody blah, bloody blah, bloody blah, and they'd be banging 3 or 4 in. You didn't have a coffin, relatives weren't there, there was no ceremonial thing, no moving the body and people marching behind the coffin or any of that. It was all got rid of. It was very, very functional, very cheap, and seen as pretty disgraceful. And they were happy with that, because disgrace is one of the important things. If you want to make that a hard place to live in, you want to make the idea of dying in it a hard thing as well, to frighten people from ever wanting to go in a workhouse.
The thing that made us, I think, get interested is, aside from its local history, and it is appalling that there's 4,084 people that we know of buried there, and there's not a marker to think that those people lived and died there.
When you go across the road into the cemetery and you see the graves for the posh people, or
Yeah.
the rich people,
Yeah.
and they've got these big angels carved and all that, and then the poor people got these old boxes that they were put in.
Yeah.
There is no difference. We're all born the same.
Those words, 100 Fishponds Road, I didn't know, to most Bristolians, that, certainly in East Bristol, they're words of fear.
Older people, we've got quite a few older people
yeah.
who are really frightened of that workhouse. If you say 100 Fishponds Road, they are really frightened of it. They still remember, their mum used to say,
Oh, my
you're
mum
going to
used
end
to.
up in the workhouse
Yeah.
if you're not careful. It has real
Yeah.
fear for people in their 80s and 90s now.
Yeah.
And it actually, if people could see that fear, it still holds 80 years later, you could really appreciate why these people have to be remembered and why we can't go back to something like that.
So they're
Archbishop Rowan Williams once said that the dead must be named, and it's important that we name the dead for the sake of our past, for the sake of the truth, and for the sake of our future.
And that's what today's about. It's about putting that right, really, and that relates to all of the 4,000 people who are buried here. Today we're putting something right. We're marking this place for that reason, so that for 1,000 years or more it won't be forgotten that these people lived and died in that institution, and they deserve remembering.
This stone, when unveiled, will be a lasting and rightful memorial to the over 4,000 souls that were laid to rest here. We are very proud to be a small part of this.
I moved on to Fishponds Road when I was 6 months old, and the house was next door to 100 Fishponds Road, so I could look over the wall and see everything that was going on all through my life, so it played a big part. And so I'm very honoured to be asked to unveil this today, and I hope that we never have these days again.
We just have a minute's silence in memorial of the 4,085 people who are buried here, and also we need to remember the 118 that were given to medical science for dissection because they had no family to collect them or to care for them. A minute's silence please, starting from now. Thank you.